Today I have a daughter-in-law, Peggy, a grandson, Mark, and a granddaughter, Linda. Well, thank you so much for coming out. We did have an exciting evening last night. Anybody watch TV last night at all? Well, it was great. It's pretty amazing how sometimes if you're in second place, they talk about the first and the third place. But last night it was a little bit different. They had a little harder time avoiding the real conversation. And like I said last night, Romney did have a victory, but we had something very, very special. We had a victory for something very important in this country. We had a victory for the cause of liberty last night. And that is so different, and that is also the reason the crowds are different, the enthusiasm is different. Somebody told me, I wasn't there, so I can't verify it, but they said, the governors, had a good crowd out, and they had a lot of enthusiasm, but he left, and everybody else left. Well, 2 to 3 hours later, we had people there still, having a real good time and celebrating. There's just so much enthusiasm. It keeps growing. It was mentioned by Mike about 4 years ago. We were much smaller in numbers, and I always talk about, the tireless, irate minority that leads the charge. But we're not so small. We're not so much a minority. We're marching on. The numbers are growing. They grew exponentially in New Hampshire, and they're going to grow continuously here in South Carolina as well. This morning they cited a poll, and of course they can cite one poll or they can make a poll up. Sometimes they try to move elections by polling. Of course, the poll they cited was I was not at the top here in South Carolina. I said, yes, but you haven't done a poll since last night, so we're on the move, and it isn't only because you have a candidate, but we have an issue. We have a set of principles that we are going to defend, and this is what motivates people. It motivates every one of us because we're doing it for a very special person. It's not just tomorrow or the next week. What we want to do is reverse the trend of this country for not only a few years or a few elections. It's a reversal of probably 100 years of slipping and sliding away from our Constitution. But the great thing is we need something different, but we don't need anything brand new. What we need to go and find out what we were told to do to run this country. And they wrote a little document called the Constitution. So this message is resonating now, and it's necessary. A lot of times I'm asked, and they say, how come it's different now than 4 years ago? Well, the country is different, and the world is different, and they're starting to wake up, and they're starting to realize those things that we had talked about for so long and you were so much aware of, that we had a messy financial system, a messy banking system, and that we had these bubbles forming. Now everybody knows about it. But I think the two most important things over and above the whole issue of liberty and, our Constitution is the fact that this campaign in the last year especially, even though it's been going on for a lot longer, we have had two issues brought to the forefront, which we cannot ignore. We must deal with if we want to get things back in order, get the budget balanced, and get a good economic system. The one issue, of course, is a different foreign policy. We don't need to drain our resources overseas, and we need to talk. We need to talk about the foreign policy of the founding fathers and the foreign policy that's permissive under the Constitution. That is non-intervention, mind our own business, and have a strong national defense. Unfortunately, we've had some in the Republican Party who thinks that if you spend less money on child health care, that might be conservative. But if you spend less money overseas, that's conservative. If you spend more, it's supposed to be conservative. Why isn't being conservative spending less money every place? I'll tell you one reason why they get worried. They get worried about national defense, which I'm worried about too. I had a little bit of experience. I spent a few years in the military in a tough time at the peak of the Cold War. So there is reason to be concerned on how you cut. The magnificent thing about cutting the military expenditures carelessly overseas, invading countries we don't need to invade, sending foreign aid to countries that don't deserve it and we don't have a right to send it. What it does is gives us a stronger national defense, not a weaker national defense. But they still will challenge and say, well, if you don't vote continuously to go to war and continuously for all these budgets, no matter what, don't distinguish between defense and just military occupation. But guess what? You probably have heard which candidate gets the most money from the active military duty people, and that is our campaign. So it's obvious that being a constitutionalist and a conservative and not wanting to waste money overseas, that the Constitution is very, very explicit. That is a federal function. It's not a state function. It's a federal function to have a strong national defense. And it can be done and not shortchanges this country in any way whatsoever. But if we continue what we're doing in foreign policy, which literally in the last 10 years of these wars, we have expanded our national debt by $4 trillion. Now, what is the solution to this? Are we going to get wise people in Washington all of a sudden say, well, let's go in this country, but not this country, let's do this, and let's bomb this country? No, what we need to do is say that once again, this country should never go to war unless the war is declared, win it, and come home. Now there is one other issue that I've talked about, and you might not have heard about it at all, but I want to make sure you know that another big issue for this campaign has to do with the monetary system, having to do with looking at the Federal Reserve and auditing the Federal Reserve and doing something about it. There you go. And Mike, when he introduced me, he said that we were all, because when they call me dangerous, they're calling you dangerous too. Just remember that. So yes, the Federal Reserve considers us a danger because we're going to break up their monopoly and all their bailouts of their friends on Wall Street and all the things that they do. But sticking to the philosophy and why the Federal Reserve and a central bank, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. A few of them there probably are not. They're probably well motivated. They're just very confused on economics. But with the whole idea that when you run out of the ability to tax the people because they'll go broke and they'll resent it, and you run out of the ability to borrow money because interest rates will go up, countries do this. All the countries of the world are doing this now. They think they can continue to just print currencies forever and create wealth. And all it does is literally destroys wealth. It not only eventually destroys the wealth because it destroys the currency, in the meantime, it does serve special interests. The destruction of a currency undermines the middle class, and the wealth of the middle class goes to the wealthy. And of course, they get control of the government. And then when the bailouts come and the monetary system works, guess who gets bailed out? The people who had been making all the money when the financial bubbles were being formed. What happens to the middle class? Not only does the middle class shrink, they become poorer, they lose their jobs, and they lose their houses. And then we end up with an educational system where we graduate maybe more people, but they can't get jobs and they owe $1 trillion. This dependency on the federal government to take care of us from cradle to grave, whether it's education or medical care or One of the toughest things to worry about when you accept a position like this, as say everybody gets to spend their money the way they want. Well, somebody might spend their money and waste it, and somebody might do something else, and they say, and I've had members of Congress tell me after asking them, why are you voting for this to tell the people what to do with their money? He says, they're too dumb. They're too dumb to know what to do, so we have to tell them. But it's the whole idea that because you allow people to make their choices, that you're not endorsing what they do. As long as they're not doing harm to you and they're not defrauding us like our government is constantly doing with our money, that you're not endorsing it. It's very easy for us to understand this in religious matters because we legalize the freedom of choice in religion, or we even, believe it or not, legalize the choice of not going to church on Sunday if you don't want to. You know, what you do is people can do what they want, and but you have to be, you're not to be punished for what they do. That does not mean you endorse what they do. What you endorse is the concept of liberty. That is what made America great. It was across the board, and it was to say, what we want to give you is individual liberty. The purpose of all political action, from my viewpoint, is the protection of liberty. That's what it should be. And the founders had a plan. They thought that we are coming together. We're going to have a national government. We are going to have a national defense. We're going to have a national currency, gold and silver. And we have some rules. We're going to have permission to have interstate commerce. But most of the rest of the Constitution was written in order to protect us against the danger of a central government. So most of the Constitution is restraining the federal government. It was not written to restrain you in any manner whatsoever. And if the people in the country still wanted more government than the federal government was provided, there was no prohibition. You can go to your state government and beg and plead for more taxes and more regulations or whatever you want if you want it. But it was not meant to be the federal government. But it's out of control. It's out of balance. Not only do we have to worry about the continuation of the accumulation of power in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, it's going one step further. We now have international government that is very much involved through environmental laws, educational mandates, and all kinds of things under the Organization of the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank. And I think that we should strictly adhere to the Constitution and not deliver any of our sovereignty up to any of these international organizations. Right now, we have a financial crisis. They know it as much as we do, and they're planning an international answer to this. They're planning through the IMF to come up with a world currency to replace the dollar, because the dollar will be replaced. You just can't keep printing them forever. They're going to have to attempt to restore confidence, but they want to come up with another paper currency controlled and ruled by the United Nations and the IMF. So I would suggest very strongly that we need to send a powerful message to those individuals in charge by showing them that we are not a small minority any longer, and we're constantly growing, and we are going to have a lot of influence with the future of this country. Now, you know, a couple of weeks ago we had a message, and we thought we had sent out a pretty positive message out of Iowa. I think we sent out a pretty positive message last night out of New Hampshire. And I think South Carolina is next on the list. So if this